So, Brian, next we're going to talk about what we have to see from this offense. And we're going to talk through, we're going to break it down level by level. And I've been seeing it in the chat. I've seen better quarterback play. I've seen better pass protection. I've seen better performance from the wide receivers. We're going to dive into all of it. But where we're going to start is kind of the forefront of the passing offense. When you think passing, go to quarterback. Notre Dame has to have better quarterback play in 2025 to help take it to that next level to start filling some of the holes that we talked about in part one and part two, Brian.
So what does that mean, Trev? Like, what does it mean to have better quarterback play? And here's what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean just looking at the numbers alone. It's I mean, yes, the numbers are important, but it's can you have those numbers in the biggest moments and on the biggest stage? And that's something that we have to see is, yes, Sam Hartman didn't always have help. But there's also times when Sam Hartman had throws he needed to be able to make in those tough moments, and he just wasn't able to do it. What's interesting is the guy that I felt in the last – since Jimmy Clausen was at Notre Dame, the quarterback who I felt had the proper demeanor to be that quarterback was arguably the least physically gifted quarterback Notre Dame has had in a long time, and that was Jack Cohn. And somebody in the chat actually said it, said Palo 27 – Cohn was a gunslinger. He had confidence in his throws. 100%. He had that demeanor, which is why he had so many big moments that year. But he also lacked the physical gifts of the other elite quarterbacks. But, you know, you look at Jack Cohn and some of the throws he made against Florida State. That wasn't a good team, but those were some big moments. You know, you look at the, you know, he had his struggles against Wisconsin and Cincinnati, but then he comes off the bench against Virginia Tech and makes some big time money throws. You know, he was on fire. Like once he kind of got reinserted back into the lineup after getting benched against Virginia Tech, and the staff kind of committed more to him because he always had that Tyler Buckner effect. And also he was getting more comfortable in the offense. He was at 10.5 against Florida State per attempt. But after that, it was 7-2, 7-2, 5-4, 5-2. And then the rest of the year, he was 9-0, 6-8, 8-9, 9-3, 6-6, 14-3, 9-9, and 7-5 in the Fiesta Bowl in a game where he threw for 509 yards and 5 touchdowns. As he got more comfortable in the offense, his numbers went way up, and he was a lot more effective. And that's why by the end of the year, even though that helped playing some not very good teams. I mean, it was a weaker schedule, but he was lighting them up, and you saw the numbers really take a jump. But he had the demeanor. I mean, Jack Cohn from Virginia Tech on was over 70% completion percentage in all but 2 games. He was at 55.9 against Oklahoma State, and he was at 66.7 against North Carolina. Those are the numbers were there. The demeanor was there, but he didn't have the arm talent that other guys had. And then in other guys that had the arm talent, they didn't have the demeanor. Ian Book is a guy that I have said I was very hard on Ian Book during his career, and I don't regret that. But it was frustrating watching Ian Book play because I've said this before. I've watched Ian Book on the field with other quarterbacks that were drafted higher than he was, or other guys were talented. And I kept telling people, like, Ian Book's problem is not arm strength or arm talent. Ian Book's got the arm to make any throw he needs to make in the Notre Dame offense. Ian Book's thing was up here, and that was something that kept him from being that guy. I used to joke in practices. I'd be like, this is Captain. I'd call him Captain Checkdown, and Vince would always laugh at me. Like, we're in practice, and he did like 7 straight checkdowns. I'm like, dude, this is the time to try to make that throw over the top on the post route. You're just taking checkdowns all day. And then you get the games on Saturday, and it's like, you know, that's what we would see is him being that. Now, when they would play teams that weren't very good, he would have more aggressiveness, but then he would lose it. Like I've said this, if Ian Book would have played his whole career the way he played early in 2018 when he took over for Brandon Wimbush, that was the best version we ever saw of Ian Book. Or if he would have played his whole career like he did the first half against Clemson in 2020, Ian Book would have had a much different career numbers-wise, but Notre Dame would have won some big games. And I would have loved to have seen that version of Ian Book against Clemson in 2018 that just let it fly, Ian Book, where he wasn't afraid to take that throw. And the other thing was frustrating is he would wait till the fourth quarter when they were behind to make some of those throws when he had no choice. And it's like, dude, if you would have made these, if you'd had the same aggressiveness early in the game that you had now, y'all would have won by 40. And so that was frustrating. So he didn't have sort of that willingness to just, man, let this sucker go. Let me go out there and make those plays. Now, I think part of that was on Brian Kelly. I think we saw this a lot under Brian Kelly, where he kind of beat guys down of don't mess up, don't mess up, don't mess up, don't mess up, where sometimes I think they were paralyzed in those type of aspects. But, we saw that throughout Ian Book's career, where he'd put up these big numbers against teams that weren't any good. And whenever they played somebody good, he was awful. And that was frustrating about his career. I mean, we saw this against, Syracuse. He was okay. He was good against Syracuse. They weren't great on defense. 4.7 yards per attempt in 18 against Clemson, 5.9 against Georgia in 2019, 2.9 against Michigan in 2019 in the rain. In 2020, 7.9 against Clemson, because in the second half, he was unwilling to make some of the throws he made. I mean, he was just throwing one-on-one go balls to Javon McKinley in the first half and letting Javon go make plays. And Javon did what? He went out and made some great plays. Can't make great plays if you're not getting the opportunity. Against Pitt, first half against Pitt, he's just throwing the ball up and letting us go. And guess what? Ben Skoranek rewarded him with some big-time plays. But then we wouldn't see that enough. Second half, Notre Dame gets a lead on Clemson, and then all of a sudden they go into a shell. I think that was as much about Brian Kelly as it was about Ian Book, to be completely honest with you. But you saw that against Clemson in this ACC title game, 7.8 yards per attempt. Against Bama in the national championship game, or semifinal, 5.9 yards per attempt. And those are the things. So in games against Alabama, the 2 against Clemson in 2020, 19 against Georgia. So that's 4 games. 19 against Michigan and 18 against Clemson. In those big games, those big moments, Ian Book had only 4 touchdown passes and averaged, I think it's somewhere around like in the 6s per attempt in those games. It's not good enough. And so so a lot of great moments, but just not good enough in those moments. He was more of a lot of arm talent, made some big time throws, could scramble around and make plays, but in the biggest moments, he wasn't willing to do what he needed to do, take the chances to help his team win. And so that was a drawback. So we've seen these Sam Hartman also had some of those issues. Sam also had an issue where the receiving core got depleted. It was a young group anyway. You had a receiver coach problem that created some big issues within the offense. A lot of people didn't know about it at the time. Your offensive line was hit or miss on how. I mean, there was games where Sam Hartman's dropping back in shotgun, and as soon as he gets to the top of his drop, there's 2 guys in his face. And I mean, it's like, well, throw the check down. He can't. He literally didn't have time to do that, to get the ball off. That's how quickly they got to him. This year we saw it with Riley Leonard. At times it was Riley not making the right reads. At times he was making the right reads and they were dropping balls. At times he didn't have time to throw. There's always something. There's always something different there that you just kept saying, like, there's something missing in it each time. But at the end of the day, quarterback play has been the one consistent where it's had its moments, but they've never had a quarterback over the course of an entire season, and especially in the big games, that's been able to step up and make enough plays. Right. And I'm seeing it. Book was clutching on those game-winning drives against inferior opponents who they were down against because of his mistakes. He was so clutch against Pitt. Yeah, it had a great post throw to Michael Boykin. His two interceptions in Pitt territory is why they were behind. Well, it's great in that drive against Virginia Tech in 19 coming from behind. Yes, he was. But it was his 2 interceptions in the red zone that are why they were behind. And so it's like, if he would have done that, and this is my whole point, if he would have done that stuff in the first half, he wouldn't have needed that moment. But when did he ever make that come from behind drive against a Penn State, against a top team? It never happened. He gets the ball at the 48-yard line with 2 minutes left against Georgia, and they do nothing. Where's that big clutch drive then? I don't care that it happened against 7-6 Virginia Tech or 7-7 Pittsburgh. Are you doing it in the big moments? And that's what was lacking from him. It's what was lacking from Sam Hartman. It honestly was lacking at times from Jack Cohn. It was lacking from Tyler Buckner. It was lacking from Drew Pine. It was lacking from Brandon Wimbush. It was lacking from Deshaun Kaiser. It was lacking from Everett Golson. It was lacking from Tommy Rees. It was lacking from Dane Christ. All those different things. You can give me all. This is the type of loser mentality that's part of the problem. Somebody just said he threw more TDs in 19 than Tua or Herbert. Again, this is a loser mentality because you're looking at numbers. Here's what Ian Book did in that year. 5 against New Mexico. 5 touchdowns against New Mexico, who that year went 2-10. He threw 5 touchdowns against Bowling Green. That team went 3-9. That's a third of his touchdowns almost against 2 teams that combined to go 5-19. He threw 4 touchdown passes against Duke, a team that season went 5-7. He threw, let's find this one. He threw 4 touchdowns against Stanford, who went 3-9, and he threw 3 touchdown passes against Boston College, who went 6-7. So that's 10, 14, and 18, 21 of his 34 touchdown passes came in 5 games against teams with a losing record. Against Michigan and Georgia, he had 3 touchdown passes and 2 interceptions. Right? I mean, this is the thing. It's not just like I said it already. It's not about the numbers alone. It's can you do that when it matters most? And when you're 21 of your 34 touchdowns are in 5 games against teams that suck, and you had 5 more against Navy. I don't care what you threw more than Tua or whatever else. You know why Tua didn't have more touchdowns that year? Because he sat out second halves of a ton of games because he threw all his touchdown passes in the first half against good teams. That's the thing. It's can you do it in the big moments? And they have not had a quarterback that could do that in a very long time. Very long time. You can argue since Brady Quinn.
Tua that year, by the way, if you're going to throw out a stat, you got to put out the whole thing. Tua also had almost 1,000 more yards, a higher completion percentage, more yards per attempt, a better quarterback rating, and Ian Book doubled his interceptions. So if you want to if you want to talk about Tua in 2019, I mean, come on, man, come on. Look, my thing with Notre Dame quarterbacks is the saying it's a day late and a dollar short, because for the reasons that you listed off, once they were behind. Once they were
by
down,
the way, Tua only played 9 games, by the way, that year.
Oh, I did not know that. But my point is, it was always a day late and a dollar short for Notre Dame quarterbacks. It was once they were down, that's when they started airing it out. And that left a lot of frustration for me, and I'm sure a lot of other fans, because you had the ability to do it. Why did you wait until this point? And some people point to the Penn State game, but at the end of the day, even though it didn't feel like it, it was a 10-3 game. Teams go into halftime with deficits. You know, it didn't happen for Notre Dame, but the tail end of their schedule in the regular season wasn't what it was. Now, they played some quality opponents, but it wasn't hard. I'll say that. But then once again, on the biggest stage, it reared its ugly head again. They were down 31-7 to Ohio State before it clicked, and it was, all right, we should probably start airing it out now. And then look what happened. So that's where the frustration for me is, as I'm sure it is with a lot of other people. Brian, you're nodding your head. I can guarantee you agree with that too. And that's where the quarterback play has to elevate, because it can't be until it's either too late or the sliver of hope is about that much for you to turn into a downfield passing offense. If you have the ability to do it, take advantage of it. And that's where I think Mike Denbrock can kind of help form this team into, it doesn't have to be one or the other. It doesn't have to be, well, we're only going to run the football, or, well, we're down by 17. It's time to start airing it out. I think he's going to bring a little bit of the in-between. So that's where the quarterback play needs to elevate for me. If you have the ability to do it for 4 quarters.
I love the loser mentality of some fans. I swear. Now he didn't have the talent around him. Ian Book got to throw to, I don't know, Chase Claypool, Miles Boykin, Chris Fink, Alizé Mack, Cole Kmet, Javon McKinley, Ben Skoranek, who won a Super Bowl. I mean, he had, poor old Ian Book didn't have anybody to throw to. Like but here's the thing. I've said this, it's not even just about Ian Book. I think a big reason why he had that mentality is because of Brian Kelly. And the part of the reason that I think Ian Book was so good letting those balls go in the fourth quarter of games or in against teams that weren't very good is because they had no choice but to let him throw. So again, this is as much about Brian Kelly as it is about Ian Book. But you can't sit there and talk about, well, it's not his fault. That's my point. It's all excuses. We're going to get to receiver play in a minute. We're going to get to the O-line in a minute. But if you think Ian Book's play was good enough to win a championship, then you don't know what it takes to win a championship at Notre Dame. It's okay to admit that. You can appreciate the kid and love how hard he played and think he was a great kid and all this other kind of stuff and sit there and say, when I watched the 2018 playoffs and it was Trevor and it was Tua and it was Kyler Murray and Ian Book, one of those didn't look like the others. It's okay to say that. And when you've got a second-round draft pick at receiver and a third-round draft pick at receiver and a tight end that got drafted and a slot receiver that played in the NFL, oh, and by the way, you've got Dexter Williams at running back out of the backfield, and you've got the line they had, and you're blaming the lack of talent on him. You're buying into the BS excuses that made Brian Kelly so famous. It's always making excuses. Here's the deal. The talent does need to get better around the quarterback. But you know what else needs to happen? The quarterback play has to be better. And we should all be able to admit that. No quarterback at Notre Dame played championship caliber since 1988. You know how I know that? Because they haven't won a championship since 1988, right? And so, I did it. So you could look at Riley Leonard, who we've defended a lot. But what are we saying? He showed it in the second half, but if he would have showed it in the first half, they would not have needed the second half comeback. Or in the case of Ohio State, maybe they would have been in better position to go play. Because imagine if the Notre Dame defense, for all its struggles, had an offense that was keeping up with Ohio State early on, and they had time to adjust, and they didn't go 3 and out back to back to back. And they had time to kind of get on the board. And it's been the case forever. And when you are talking about a guy that went 5-5 against ranked opponents and lifting him up as if he was some phenomenal all-time great, you're accepting mediocrity. And that's why Notre Dame hasn't won in a long time. What Riley Leonard did was awesome. Wasn't good enough because they fell short. What Sam Hartman did wasn't good enough. What Jack Cohn did wasn't good enough. What Riley Leonard did, Ian Book did wasn't good enough. Right? I mean, those are the different things. Is it's got to get better. We should all be able to acknowledge that there's been some good quarterbacks. They didn't win whatever 30-something games at Notre Dame under Ian Book in spite of Ian Book. We're not arguing that. But we are arguing very clearly that Ian Book wasn't a championship caliber quarterback. And that shouldn't be up for debate. Now, to get to that point, Trevor, they do have to get better. So we've already kind of thrown that aside. We don't have to deal with that mess anymore. We can now talk about what needs to happen moving forward. And the reality is quarterback play has got to get better. Yes, it'd be nice to have a guy that can run and be dynamic like Riley, but it has to be more effective throwing the football. That's the thing about J.J. McCarthy. If you're going to have the lack of numbers that he had, you better be efficient, you better make some big plays, and you better be able to make plays with your legs. Because there were some games where you look at the numbers and you're like, well, J.J. didn't exactly put up a bunch of passing numbers in that. I mean, he was good, but he wasn't like, lighting the world on fire or anything, in that moment. I mean, yeah, he did this and he did that, but the throwing the football, he didn't exactly blow me away. And you're like, yeah, but look at some of the plays he made with his legs in those games, and that's what he kind of brought to the table. He didn't make a ton of plays with his legs, but he made clutch plays with his legs. On top of throwing for 221 yards against Alabama, he also rushed for 25 yards on 3 carries. On top of the 140 yards he had passing against Washington, he also ran for 31. So if you're going to have a guy that's not as dynamic as these other quarterbacks, he better have some mobility. But I'm willing to sacrifice that for a guy that can get the ball to the more dynamic players more consistently, more effectively, and in better position. And that's where I want to see this next level. If Kenny Minchie or CJ Carr are good runners and they can scramble or whatever, if Steve Angeli can run, fine. But at the end of the day, the passing has got to get a lot better. Decision-making has got to get better, pre and post-snap. The consistency has to be there more. Every quarterback's going to have an off day. Every single one has an off day. But you've got to be more consistently effective. It can't be like the roller coaster that we've been on for so many years. You have to be more consistent. And you have to be more willing to attack all parts of the field. I think that more than anything has been one of the biggest issues for Notre Dame quarterbacks, Trevor, is an unwillingness or inability, whether it's scheme related, whether it's coaching related, whether it's up to them. It's not so much about hammering the quarterbacks as it's hammering the entire operation that leads to a lack of just really being aggressive, tacking down the field. That doesn't mean go routes and post routes only. That could mean throwing some back shoulders, throwing some comeback routes, low and away on the sideline, where, yeah, he's not wide open, but that guy coming out of the break, you throw that ball about 3 feet off the ground down towards the sideline, he goes down and catches it, or it's an incomplete pass. It's those type of things also. It's being able to hit that curl route between, 4 feet of defenders and not always just, I'm not going to make that throw. Knowing when to make that throw, knowing when not to make that throw. But just being willing to attack all levels of the defense and having a little bit more confidence in their ability, but then also their playmakers' ability. That was the biggest thing that we saw from Riley Leonard in the last 2 games, is his willingness to just throw the ball, not throw it up like he's just like, blindly throwing the ball in the air. But hey, look, man, Jaden Greathouse has got a one-on-one. I'm going to give him a chance to go make a play. Chris Mitchell's got a one-on-one. I'm going to give him a chance to go make a play. Bo Cons is one-on-one on this RPO. I'm going to go give him a chance to go make a play. And you know what they did for him in every instance in the playoffs? Every single time in the college football playoff, when Riley Leonard threw the ball up to his receivers or tight end and said, I need you to go make a play, I believe almost every time they made the play. But there was an unwillingness to make those same exact throws throughout the regular season. And that's been true a long time. It's like some of the great throws that Ian Book made. I've talked about this. That great throw against Pitt to Miles Boykin for a touchdown. Great throw. Big moment. You're down. Your undefeated season's about to go down. If he makes that same throw against Clemson in the first quarter, Notre Dame's up 7-0. I mean, that's the thing. It's you've got to be willing to make some more of those throws. And Notre Dame's quarterbacks have not been willing to do that, where Will Howard was more willing to do that. Okay, that's not fair. Riley Leonard doesn't have Jeremiah Smith. Granted, but Riley did that same thing in that game, and Jaden Greathouse did make those plays also. And Bo Collins did, and Jordan Faison did, and Chris Mitchell did in his opportunities, and Bo did as well in the playoff. He didn't have a lot of opportunities, but he caught every ball they threw at him, including the touchdown was not an easy catch because the guy was in decent coverage, and Riley put it right on him, right on his gut, and Bo made the play. That was a big moment, and Bo made the play. So that's the thing, is you've got to be more willing to say, I got to let my playmakers go eat. And when Ian Book was at his best, it's when he was willing, like the Stanford game in 2018, when he's just throwing back shoulders all day to Miles Boykin and hit him on over routes. You're just like, dude, that's a thing of beauty. And that's the thing, is if we could have got that more often, maybe we're having a different conversation about Ian Book. And same thing with every other quarterback. So that's where I want to see from this is you've got to get quarterbacks that not only have the talent, but the willingness to attack the entire field, no matter the opponent.
Yeah, it's going to be a big step in their evolution. It's going to be the willingness to trust your guys and take the shot one-on-one. And that's what we saw in the postseason from this offense, which leaves a lot of room for hoping what this room is going to look like with a guy in Riley Leonard whose strength wasn't passing the football. It's okay to say that. Wasn't bad at it, but he's a guy who's a dynamic runner. To me, I'm always going to use the Georgia game as a little bit of a reference, is the difference that you're going to see from Notre Dame from 24 to 25. When they're shutting down Jeremiah Love, when outside of 2 carries, they're shutting down Jadarian Price, you're not going to have a quarterback under center in 2025, regardless of it being Angeli, Carr, or Minchie, who can rush for 80 yards on 11, 14 carries, whatever he had. So the difference is going to be willingness to take your shots, because I think the Notre Dame receiving core showed in the returners that are coming back, prove their worth in the postseason. Jordan Faison on that deep route against Indiana. Jaden Greathouse against Penn State and against Ohio State. Eli Raridan in moments against Ohio State. And then obviously you see what Malachi Fields did at Virginia over his tenure while he was there. He is a proven guy coming in, great catch radius. Hey, if you throw the football in my direction more times than not, I'm coming down with it. So that's what I want to see. But diving into the wide receiver play, because
just real quick. So we will get into more specifics of somebody asked a great question. Texas Mac asked, is that QB at Notre Dame now? We'll get to that. We're talking more big picture right this second, but I promise you we're going to get to that because that's part of our reason for excitement. But continue, Trev.
Another facet of Notre Dame's pass offense improving is not just with the quarterback that we had alluded to. The other part is who's on the receiving end of these passes, and that's the wide receivers. Wide receiver play is going to be a big piece in the passing offense elevating. They have the talent to do it. They have the potential to do it. But, Bryan, what we need to see from wide receiver play is going to have to elevate from where it was at in 24 and 23. Yeah. Bottom line.
Receiver is a lot like quarterback. There's been talent there, but it's inconsistent talent. Some years it's there, some years it's not. If you wanted to get into a debate about Ian Book not having the proper talent, you can make that case in certain years. You can't make that case in others, but it shouldn't be that way. It should be consistent from year to year. 2018, he's got Miles Boykin, Chase Claypool, Chris Fink, Alize Mack, Cole Kmet, all to throw to, plus Dexter Williams and Tony Jones out of the backfield. All guys have played in the NFL. They had Kevin Austin on that team. Never used him. 2019, he has Chase Claypool, Cole Kmet, Chris Fink, Javon McKinley, Braden Lindsey, who they didn't use until the last 3 games of the year, and he balled. That's not on Ian Book. That's on the coaching staff not putting him in the game and giving him more of those opportunities. And then in 2020, you had a good receiving core, but not a great one. But you had Javon McKinley, Michael Mayer, Ben Skoranek, Avery Davis, Kyron out of the backfield, Tommy Trumbull. Braden Lindsey was on that team as well, although he was banged up all year. But you had weapons in different years, but it wasn't consistent. And then you come out in 2021, and you've got Michael Mayer and Kevin Austin, but then there's a bit of a drop-off after that because you had a lot of guys injured. You had Lorenzo Styles stepped up at times that year. He had his moments, but then you come out in 2022, and you've got Michael Mayer, and you've got Jaden Thomas, Lorenzo Styles as a sophomore. He doesn't really step up big. Braden Lindsey actually had a pretty good year, but they just never threw to him. I mean, Braden Lindsey should have had 800-900 yards that year on about 30 catches. If you look at how many times he was open that year in those type of moments. And then, but it was just, there was no depth. Nobody was really that go-to guy outside of Michael Mayer. And so there was definitely years that you could look at and say the talent wasn't good enough. Last year, Notre Dame's with Sam Hartman's trying to rely on an offense that's, yes, you've got Michael Mayer, but you've got a converted running back in the slot who you're trying to turn into a go-to guy as opposed to being a complementary weapon. And then you've got a sophomore who you needed to step up. He didn't. Your receivers coach didn't put him in position at times, didn't work with him at times. You're then relying on a bunch of freshmen to step up. One of your veterans that you're counting on, Jaden Thomas, gets hurt early. Deion Colsey gets hurt early. But your recruiting issues have kept it to where you've had good receiver talent, but not really good receiver talent consistently enough. Javon McKinley, Ben Skoranek, Avery Davis is a good receiving core. That's not an elite receiving core. That's not even a really good receiving core. Like Javon McKinley was a really good football player his last year, but he needs to be your number 2, not your number 1. You need to complement him with like Miles had Chase as a compliment. He had Chris Fink as a compliment. Ben Skoranek is a quality football player. He should have been your number 3, not your number 2, or even your number 4, not your number 2. And that's sort of the issue they've run. And then in 2023 was probably the worst, the worst group of pass catchers they've had from the standpoint of where guys were in their transitions to a position or in their youth. And Sam Hartman, that's what Sam Hartman was working with. Receiving core this year was good. I don't think it was necessarily fit this quarterback. I think a guy like Chris Mitchell would have had a much different year if he had Sam Hartman throwing to him than Riley Leonard. It's not good or bad. It's just he came in the wrong year. He would have been much better served to be at Notre Dame in 2023. That's part of it. But Bo Collins is a good football player. He shouldn't be your number 1. And that's just the reality of it. And so the talent at receiver has not been consistently good enough to be a championship team. It's getting there. It's been better at times than what the production has shown, but it has not been like I've said this about 2023. I felt that in 2023, trying to think how to say this, Trev. Kind of looking at. I'm actually. Let me deal with this. We don't need this stuff. We don't need this stuff in the chat. Sorry, guys. We don't need that kind of going at each other. Here's kind of where I'm going with this, Trev. When you look at the receiver talent the last couple of years, 2023, I argued that the receivers were not as bad as people make them out. People made them out to be. They were open more than they should have been. Than people thought they were. There was a whole lot of different things. It was more of a standpoint of they were not getting the ball in time. They weren't the top read. The O-line wasn't there. But it was never if the quarterback would throw the ball, this is an elite group, right? That's what I'm saying. But it still wasn't good enough.
When I go back through and I look at the 2023 receiving core, the thing that I think of the most is what would it look like if an entire receiving room was just filled with raw guys? And that's what it was. Raw guys who were not pointed in the right direction from a coaching standpoint. And you talk about timing and things just didn't align. First-year offensive coordinator in Jared Parker. And not first-time offensive coordinator at Notre Dame. Was that his first ever, or was he an offensive coordinator at a previous destination?
He was the OC at West Virginia, but he wasn't the primary play caller.
Okay.
The head coach, Neil Brown, had a big role in what they were doing.
Gotcha. So, albeit, give or take, first-year offensive coordinator in Jared Parker. And regardless of his previous tenure, it was his first time at Notre Dame as the offensive coordinator. Mm-hmm. You had a transfer portal quarterback, and you had a lot of young wide receivers because a lot of your veterans were dealing with injury issues. And so for me, I look at it, and the wide receiver development, as far as who the coach was at the time in the room, was not doing his due diligence, getting those young guys ready. That was the difference this year.
Like just an example, they would work on stuff. And you want to talk about part of the reason why they struggled? I was told this during the season and had it confirmed afterwards. But they would practice all week. Okay, we want Tobias running this route, or we want Greathouse running this route. And they would practice it all week, and Sam would make that throw 5-6 times to Tobias, or 5-6 times to Jaden Greathouse, or Jaden Thomas, or whoever. And then they'd get in the game, and Chancey Stuckey would put somebody different in the game than what Jared Parker and the team had game planned for. So, like, for example, this is what I was told. The first drive against Louisville, the go route that they threw to Rico Flores, all week they practiced that, I was told, to Tobias, and they were hitting it all week. 6'4" guy against a 5'11" corner, taller, not a 5'6". I think it was it Brownlee that made the pick, but their two corners that year were taller guys. And instead of putting your 6'4" guy in the game, you put your 6-foot guy in the game, Rico Flores, who wasn't even supposed to be there and is not a one-on-one player. And then lo and behold, it gets picked. A shocker. So that stuff was going on also. And that's a big reason why that dude got fired like 5 minutes after the season was over with. Because that stuff was going on. That was an anomaly. That was not, to your point, that was not the case this year. They had a guy that was much better about making sure that the right people were in the games at the right times. So that's part of that as well. That was an anomaly. You can't blame that on a lot of years, but you can blame it last year. But that's what's so frustrating when you look at the missed opportunities. There's always something with this pass game that keeps them in the fold. But like that, so I just want to make that clear, Trev. Keep going with where you're going.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I mean, look, to me, what I need to see overall from this receiving core is I need to see them, one, play at a more consistent level. If they can just replicate what they did in the postseason for an entire season, it's good by me. It means they're moving in the right direction. And also continuing to utilize people in the right spots. Right. Sometimes I think they were a little bit hindered. We're going to talk more about the diversity of the room later on in the show. But I do believe that they're getting better at diversifying what they do on offense, but continuing to do that. Those are things that I need to see. And then just continuity and consistency around urgency coming off the line of scrimmage. Because there were some games where it was like, man, these guys don't even look like they want to fire off the line of scrimmage. They don't know. They don't want to run this route because they don't know if the ball is coming to them. And that's it's a life of a wide receiver. It's tough. It's a really hard ask, to run everything at 110% when there's a good chance you're not getting the football. But that level of consistency has to raise. But for me, overall, Bryan, the 2023 room, when I look at it, it's just a room full of raw guys. Like, what would it look like if a football team had 5 guys that were just all raw? And that's what it was for me last year.
In 2024 or 2023?
23, sorry. When I'm,
Yeah, I'm with you. Some people, like when I think last year, I'm still thinking of 23 like you are. But some people, mean it to be this past year. Agree. And there were injuries. Jaden Thomas going down early in the season hurt them a lot. And he played, but he was never the same. Jaden Greathouse dealt with a hamstring injury that slowed him down the middle of the season. I mean, there's other different reasons for it. And then this year, you had guys in positions where, Bo Cons is a good football player. He helped his football team, but he should not be your number one. You didn't have that type of number one, take a game over guy like Penn State had in Tyler Warren, or like Ohio State had in Jonathan Smith or Emeka Egbuka. This is not that kind of guy. If you're going to not have that kind of guy, you need 4 or 5 guys that are really good. I don't know they always had that this year. Mitchell Evans wasn't the same he was last year. He had some games here and there, but overall he wasn't. And they just didn't have that type of guy. And you're going to need that type of guy to win the championship because you're going to need that kind of guy. But here's the thing. But they did have a guy step up in the championship game, though, and be that kind of guy, and that was Jaden Greathouse. I mean, Jaden Greathouse was like, as soon as you start throwing the ball, it's like anything you can do, I can do better. Yeah, you made your one big play, but I made 3. I'm the guy that made Caleb Downs look like a fool in space and get our first touchdown. I'm the guy that went against, was it Jordan Hancock, and just he's holding my one arm. I'm still going to catch that touchdown with my other one. I think it's 3 big plays in that game. I think he beat 3 different people because didn't he beat Cody Simon on the other one, the linebacker, on the deep drag on 3rd and 9?
Yes.
So he beats Caleb Downs and Jermaine Matthews on one play, beats for a touchdown, beats Jordan Hancock for a touchdown on another one, and beats Cody Simon on an over route on the 3rd and 9 and another one. So it wasn't like he just had a good matchup that game. He was beating anybody they put against him. Well, that's what you need more of. That performance was there. But in the first half, the quarterback wasn't making the proper reads to get the ball where it needed to get to. So that's why and we'll get into the next thing, your pass pro's got to be better. And I think that's a big part of it too, Trevor. There's been years the receiving corps has been good enough. I mean, I think the 2015 receiving corps was good enough. It's pretty good. The 2018 receiving corps was good enough, in my opinion, to compete for a championship. I don't care what anybody says. But in the biggest game, the quarterback wasn't good enough. Just wasn't. In 19 against Georgia, Cole Kmet was eating Georgia alive. Whenever they actually threw the ball to Chase Claypool, he made plays. They gave Lawrence Keys one chance to make a play in that game. And guess what? He made it on a one-on-one go route. You just weren't willing to throw the ball when you needed to in that moment. And other times, like last year and this year, there were times the quarterback was making the throws he needed to make, and the receivers stepped up and made plays. I mean, so it's always something. And then there's other games where I felt like, the quarterback and receivers were playing well, but the O-line wasn't playing well enough and wasn't giving them good time. So the O-line too, especially recently, the last 2 years, especially under Joe Rudolph, I thought Joe Rudolph did a great job of making improvements from how they went about handling the run game from last year to this year. They were a catch team last year. They weren't a push team last year. They weren't a physical team. They didn't drive their feet through contact last year. They had a lot of MAs in the run game last year. This year, despite being young, much more physical, much better leg drive, use their hands better, can still need some work. But I think that's as much about having a bunch of young guys as it is about what's being taught. But, much better push, play with much better angles, got to the second level a lot better than they did last year. So we saw a lot of improvement in that regard. Now going into year 3, what Coach Rudolph needs to work on improving is now get better with the pass game stuff. Be better against the twists and slants. Be better in one-on-one. Teach them to better, play with better angles on the edge. They get beat off the edge with speed rushes on plays where you're just like, that shouldn't have been a win. Like that guy did not come off the way that he should, that he needed to get a win on that. Like that was just bad technique. Well, it's understandable when you got a true freshman, a left tackle, and a redshirt sophomore in the first year to start at right tackle. That's going to happen. You can live with that, but can't happen in year 2. That's the thing moving forward. Those things got to get fixed. Okay, I understand why you maybe had some issues this year with some of the twist stuff. If we're going to make excuses, and excuses aren't always bad because sometimes they're legitimate. I mean, it's like, yeah, it's an excuse, but it's also the reality. You can say, well, you're making excuses that they had a bunch of freshmen on the receiver last year. Well, yeah, it's an excuse, but it's also true. They did have a bunch of
Yeah.
The offensive line had a bunch of different lineups throughout the year. You know, what you thought you were going to have coming into fall camp gets nixed within a week. You get a new starter at left guard, new starter at left tackle. You're dealing with a brand new starter at right tackle. Then by game 3, your center's out, your right guard's out. And then your right guard comes back in a few games. He replaces your left guard. That's a new lineup. You get into the semifinals. You lose Anthony Knapp and Rocco Spindler within like a quarter of each other. And you're getting your, 6th or 7th new different lineup in the championship game. All right. I understand that. Well, Ohio State also went through that last year, and their offensive line played better against Notre Dame than, but they weren't going against Jack Sawyer and JTT. And so there's all things that you can point to. It is what it is. But now in year 3, Emil's going into his second year as a starter. Billy's going into a senior year. Anthony's going to be a sophomore with a whole year starting under his belt. Anthony Napple. Jagasaw is going into his junior year. He's got more experience now. There's no reasons now to still be struggling with those things in year 3. And so if he can continue enhancing what we're seeing from the run game, so like you made that growth from year 1 to year 2, there's some things they can still clean up in the run game. We talked about that in the first 2 rounds. They stopped moving their feet against Georgia and Indiana. They had a tough time handling some of the stuff they were throwing at them. Yeah, you need to get better there. But just continue just normal, steady growth in that run game stuff, which I thought, again, made huge improvements in year 2. And now it's like but now it's time you got to get the pass pro more consistent. Because in today's era, teams they're bringing more pressures. They know they don't have the time to just win on the outside as much anymore. They know they've got to bring line games. They're doing things to try to shut down your run game that then if it's a pass, they kind of run through the run gap blitz into the backfield. There's all those type of things that went on that you got to just clean up now. There wasn't a whole lot of plays this year where you're just like, that guy's not good enough. Like outside of what? Anthony Nat or Emil Wagner against Abdul Carter. It's probably the only game where you're like, that guy's not good enough to stop that guy.
And
but you know who else has that problem?
Yeah.
That's another one, right? There weren't a lot of those. There weren't a lot of those. Those things need to obviously continue to recruit elite players, but that's rarely going to happen. It's more about you got to play better. You've got to play with better technique. You've got to handle this. You got to handle that. So it's all coachable. It's all correctable. That's encouraging. And you know who else had a hard time blocking Abdul Carter? Like everybody in the country not named. I mean, and it was, well, Donovan Jackson. Donovan Jackson gave up like 4 or 5 pressures against Abdul Carter. So his version of slowing him down looks a whole lot different than what we're envisioning as slowing someone down. That guys like that are going to get theirs. That's not who you evaluate. Well, Emil Wagner should get benched because look what Abdul Carter did to him. Okay, I watched Abdul Carter do that to everyone. You know what I mean? Like let's not use our agenda to make a point. You know, let's not look for facts to support our narrative that aren't necessarily fair or there. You know
because in the same light, I watched Emil Wagner throw Jack Sawyer with one arm.
Right.
I mean,
right. Now, should there be a battle at right tackle? There should be a battle at every position. When you recruit the O-line the way Notre Dame does, you should always have to earn your keep. But there's this, like, the point is the talent won't be the issue. Experience was a problem this year. Cohesiveness was a problem this year. And those aren't necessarily things that Joe Rudolph could do anything about. He can't all of a sudden make Anthony Knapp a junior. He can't all of a sudden make Emil Wagner a third-year starter. You're working with what you're working with. In some areas, they made great growth. Now they need to make a great growth in other areas in year 3. And if they can do that in the pass game, that's going to be huge because it's going to be even more important next year, Trevor, because they don't have Riley Leonard to bail them out. People have talked about, well, they only gave up X number of sacks this year. Put any other quarterback on your roster at quarterback, and Notre Dame is in the bottom 50 of sacks allowed this past season, if not the bottom 30, because Riley Leonard saved you from a lot of sacks this year. That doesn't mean it's going to be the case next year, but you're going to have to make sure, because I don't care if it's Steve Angeli, I don't care if it's Kenny Minchie, I don't care if it's CJ Carr. you are going to have a quarterback that's not able to avoid pressure with his legs and his size and strength next year the way you did this year, which means you've got to be the ones that just give him more time. That's going to be a big key for next season. And if Joe Rudolph can make the same growth in pass pro from 24 to 25 that he made from the run game from 22 to 23, now I know the run game numbers were still good in 2023, but we talked about this. It was a lot of just, number one, you had really good talent, but there was also the same level of inconsistency. You had a bunch of yards against bad teams. You know, you ran for over 600 yards in your last 2 games against not very good teams. You ran for 236 against Central Michigan, 221 against Tennessee State. You had a good game against Ohio State, but you couldn't run on Duke outside of 1 carry by Audric. You couldn't run on USC. You got dominated by Louisville. You ran on Clemson in the first half, didn't do jack against them in the second half. Right? I mean, it was the consistency wasn't there in 2023. And you made improvement to where this year they were far more explosive and far more consistent with their running game this season than they were last season. Obviously, the last 2 games of the postseason weren't great, but some of that was those good teams are going to say, we're not going to let you run the ball, and guess what? You're going to be able to run the ball. That's why you need to be able to hurt them with the pass game. And for half of those games, they couldn't. So if the pass pro can have that same kind of growth, then I think this offense will have a great shot at being really good next year. But that's a big key. That's a really big key for this, Trev.
I'm going to sound like a broken record, but for me, it's level of consistency, because over Joe Rudolph's 2 years as Notre Dame's offensive line coach, we've seen moments against Ohio State. Honestly, in 23 and 24, pass pro outside of a couple plays is pretty decent, if I'm being honest. But
first half, it was
yeah,
but second half, it was fine.
And for me, it just can't have the in-between. You can't have moments where it's like, yo, maybe they're taking the step. And then you have other moments where it's, okay,
like
you
Louisville,
can't just not.
When they were getting Riley Leonard hit on quick game.
Man.
Like, do you know how inexcusable it is for your quarterback to get hit that much in quick game? But that's what we saw this year against Louisville.
Mm-hmm.
Bro, he was getting hit by multiple guys in quick game. Like catch, plant, throw. I mean, that should never happen. It should never happen. Ever. And that happened multiple times this season with this offensive line, Trev. Ever. And they still played for the championship. Like, that's what should get you excited about next year. Is like, guys, this is all correctable. Those things weren't happening because they lacked talent. They were happening because they were making mistakes. They weren't prepared, for whatever reason. And this is even to blame Joe Rudolph, as we just said. There's a lot of reasons why continuity is so important on the O-line. So important. And what Ohio State did this year with their offensive line is rare. You can't assume you're going to be able to repeat that, where they just had the multiple injuries and were able to overcome them. And you're moving Donovan Jackson from guard to tackle and, those type of things. But it happened for them. It didn't happen for Notre Dame. Partly because Notre Dame was putting a lot younger guys on the field in some of those instances, but not always. I mean, the first 2 injuries they had, they put 2 seniors on the field who started the year before. Can't really blame that on that. You just got to do a better job. You got to do a better job with your offensive line. That's the task for Coach Rudolph. Great job in the run game. Now get the pass blocking going next year. And there are also some schematic things as we slide into this last topic, Trev. There's definitely some schematic things they need to do better pass game wise, but a big thing is they've got to really think through their pass pro philosophy, scheme wise, how they set checks, all of it, because there were some things that you could tell that teams were finding holes in their scheme that they could identify. This is what they're doing. So there's some sort of tell. I don't know what it is, but there's some sort of tell in what Notre Dame was doing this year that was allowing teams to kind of have a sense of where the weak spot was going to be in their protection. Or they knew if they did this, they could get Notre Dame to do this, and that would open up, which again is still finding the weak spot in what they're doing. And so schematically, that's one thing they're going to definitely have to look at. Yes, Joe Rudolph needs to do a better job of teaching certain things, but there's some things they're going to have to think through schematically this offseason and maybe sit down with some other teams that are doing some things a little bit different and think through, okay, what are we doing in pass pro that is going to allow us to be more effective more consistently, and then the other one is going to be looking at it from the standpoint of what are we doing it could be something as simple as, hey, our slide protection works, but we have a habit of sliding it this way when we should slide it that way at times. Or our mic protection works, but we're kind of old school with it. We're kind of sliding in here, but a lot more teams are bringing their pressures from here. In the past, maybe you're facing a lot of teams that bring that boundary pressure, and so you set your mic protection to go that way, or teams are, or now you say maybe we'll set to the field, or vice versa. You just have to be more prepared to handle those things. And so sometimes it's not so much that your scheme is wrong. Sometimes it's just you're not setting it correctly against certain looks, or you're not complementing certain pass concepts with the proper protection scheme, and you've just got to make some adjustments there. In some other instances, it's simply just looking at it from the standpoint of, hey, you got to do a better job of teaching guys how to play, and that's going to be part of it as well. Real quick, I saw somebody ask, I was meant to explain this in the beginning of the show, but I wore my Gap closer shirt today, and my point was going to be closing the gap is not just about recruiting at this point in time for Notre Dame. It's also about how you play. And one of the ways you need to close the gap is obviously throwing the football. So, Matt S., thank you for asking that. I was going to bring that up in the intro, but I got distracted and completely forgot. So that's my bad. But that's why the gap closers, because this is an area where Notre Dame needs to close the gap in regard to some of those top teams. So now, when you look at sort of what Notre Dame needs to do scheme-wise also, I do think there needs to be some continued adjustments in the pass game from how they go about attacking teams, not even just looking at the personnel. But one thing we talked about last week, and we won't rehash it now, is Mike Denbrock did some things this year. Like he loves the slot fade. We did a breakdown of that before the season, where we looked at some LSU film and talked about the slot fade. We talked about some concepts that they like to run, and he saw those. The slot fade worked this year, and I don't think Riley felt good about it early, but he got more and more comfortable with it later in the year. We saw them run a touchdown against Florida State with a slot fade. They got a slot fade touchdown against USC. They had a slot fade touchdown against Penn State, had a 3rd and 7, 3rd and 9 conversion against Penn State off of a slot fade. You hit a touchdown pass against Ohio State on the slot fade also. So we saw more of that. We'll see more of that next year. I think next year we'll see it out of even different looks, using a lot differently. They were a little bit handicapped on how they could use it this year just because of pass pro and your quarterback and some different factors. But we saw, he hit Jane Greathouse on the slot fade against Georgia Tech. So we saw it more and more, and I think next year we'll see it even more than we saw it this year. But there was other concepts that I know Mike Denbrock likes to throw that we didn't see as much of this year. He likes to throw posts. He likes to throw a post or two a game. We didn't see that as much this year. They had some issues with it early on. Obviously, Riley Leonard threw a pick on a post route against Northern Illinois that got picked off. I just don't think Riley felt really great about throwing post routes, so we didn't see a lot of them. He threw the bad post route against Georgia Tech for a pick. I don't think he read post routes really well. And I understand that. Some quarterbacks just don't read post routes super great. They're not super comfortable with it. They don't see that backside, or they just kind of lock. They get in their head where they make the decision too quick because they feel like it's a deeper throw. So I've got to get to the top and I got to let her go. So I make my decision too early. We saw him. I don't think he was comfortable with it. And so he definitely, I don't know that we ever saw him throw an inside post. And that was a part of what Mike Denbrock likes to do. Mike Denbrock also in the past has really liked to work the seams, vertical seams. He did that a lot at Cincinnati. He did that a lot at LSU. We didn't see him do that a lot this year. That's because Mike Denbrock's a good coach who doesn't just force feed his offense down to personnel that doesn't fit it. I don't think Riley was real comfortable throwing that route. I don't know that he had receivers that outside of maybe Greathouse that were really good at that type of concept of finding that open zone. So I think we'll see more of that. There's certain he likes to run in the past would like to run slip screens. That's not really a screen you're going to run with this 2024 Notre Dame team. And well, hold on a second. You got Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price and Aeneas Williams. It's not that. It's when teams are playing to stop the run so much and they have that many guys in the box and playing the alleys, you don't have the lanes to create a slip screen. A slip screen is great against teams that want to run cover 4, cover 2, have that extra safety back. It's more of they're defending the pass more. Let's hit that slip screen. So the pass rush comes up, they're dropping 7. Then we find that space in between to kind of hit that slip screen, hit that little angle screen to the back. Those things weren't as effective this year because teams put so many resources close to the line of scrimmage. It would have been much more difficult to get that type of concept in. Next year, if Notre Dame is better throwing the ball and they're more balanced, then I think you're going to see some opportunities. It's the same reason why we didn't see them throw a lot of swing screens. When teams are that tight to the line of scrimmage and they're single high a lot post-snap, you have a harder time getting the numbers you need to be effective with some of the swing screens and the slide screens. As you get more effective with a more balanced pass attack, those things open up more. The tight end under screen off read zone, we didn't see that a ton this year. He ran that a lot at Cincinnati, ran it a lot at LSU. It didn't fit with this offense very well because of how teams defended this offense, because they weren't a team that were going to scare anybody throwing the ball down the field. And so there was a lot of concepts like that, Trev, that we'll see more of that'll help. But then there's some other things that we talk about too that needs to be happening with how you use your personnel. And I know you had a really good first couple points that you want to see some changes that fit the personnel, but also that you just see a lot of teams that are really good throwing the football use these things and incorporate it into their offense.
Yeah, the first one for me is, to your point, utilizing your personnel differently. Now, one of the benefits that Notre Dame has, and we're going to talk more about this in our reasons for optimism, but they have a diversified receiving room. And when Mike Denbrock has been at his best, we draw a lot of analogies back to what he did at LSU. Now, let's call a spade here. They don't have a Malik Neighbors. They don't have a Kayshon Boutte on their team. They don't have a Brian Thomas on their team. But what Mike
Denbrock
don't have
Jaden Daniels on their team either.
Right,
yeah.
right,
yeah.
right. Yeah,
that helps.
Yeah,
that helps.
Absolutely. But
do they have some Alec Pierces and some Trey Thomases and some Tyler Whites and a Desmond Ritter, Josh Wiley? You know, that I think they have on their roster.
Yes. And when you have personnel groupings like that, you need to be able to diversify how you use them. And that's going to be one of the things that I'm going to be looking for. And what I hope to see in this upcoming season is, yes, you brought Malachi Fields in to be your boundary receiver. Doesn't mean you just have to stick him in the boundary every offensive snap. Move him around. Yes, we've seen Jordan Faison be a really effective slot receiver for Notre Dame. He's able to make plays after the catch on quick little drag routes, some slant routes, but you don't just have to keep him in the slot and leave him there. So for me, I would like to see their personnel used differently. And one of the ways that you get there is I would like to see them use motion differently. That's my second point. Now, in 2024, a lot of their motions were quick little zip motions, or it would be just,
yeah.
And then towards the end of the season, especially in the postseason, it was just motioning the tight end to the side where they had to set the protection. That was a lot of the motion that we saw. So for me, I would like to see more things.
Except look at the touchdown pass against Penn State. Yep. That motion, that quick zip motion, because you had done that so much the week before against Georgia and thrown Jordan Faison on the ball, they were really keen on Jordan Faison on that play, which is partly what opened up that. Trev, it was crazy how much just that little zip motion got Notre Dame receivers open all the time this season. And they didn't hit a lot of them for different reasons, but they still hit a lot of. I mean, there's too much they missed. I think of the play against Purdue where Bo Collins is wide open for a touchdown, and Anthony Knapp gets launched into Riley Leonard, so the ball just kind of goes flying. There was a lot of those instances this year where just that little zip motion, and that was it. Imagine if they incorporated, to your point, some of the things that you're about to talk about, because that little zip motion was really effective. But just moving the tight end around to get him into position to block, that was a necessity of this running team. You're going to have to make some adjustments next year with your run game to where you don't have to manipulate your tight end with the motion. You manipulate him post-snap so you can better utilize your receivers to get movement, or your running backs in motion to get movement, to create some more opportunities and to get the defense adjusting in different ways than what we saw this year.
Motioning into the stack was also really effective for them. I mean, just running at a stack in general. I mean, you go back through and you think, I think one of Jaden Harrison's deep catches down the field was out of stack. Jaden Greathouse, when he motioned into a stack, that was his touchdown against Penn State. Louisville was
great. It was the drive where Louisville had made it a 1-score game, 24-17. They motioned to a stack, and that's how they just turned Jaden Harrison loose. Just didn't cover him because that stack they got to communicate right when the ball is being snapped, and they communicated poorly. And Jaden Harrison just runs a slot fade wide open for the catch. To your point, it was the Louisville game, and that's a big game and a big moment. To your point, Trev.
Oh yeah. Well, now and plus you are now starting to have the personnel to be able to do more of those things. You bring in a Malachi Fields, Jaden Greathouse builds on his performance, but those are some of the things I want to see schematically. The last one for me, Bryan, is I want to see the tight ends more involved downfield. And you already touched on it a little bit with more active in seam routes. That fits Eli Raridan's skill set, like we've talked about before. Hitting tight ends more on deep in routes, deep over routes, especially if, and it all kind of, the domino effect all starts adding up, right? If Malachi Fields is more effective in the boundary and you get Jaden Greathouse more effective, going throughout the game. Notre Dame's tight end room hasn't had the impact that it did in 2022 when Michael Mayer was somebody that you had to ID the second he stepped onto the field and you had to know where he went. Mitchell Evans had a few games in 2023 where it was like that, but unfortunately we didn't get to see the culmination of it because he tore his ACL in November. And then this season he was working his way back. It wasn't the same. Now, with that being said, I think Eli Raridan has the skill set to do it. You have a really talented true freshman coming in James Flanagan. And if Cooper Flanagan can come back healthy, you have 3 different types of pass catchers at the tight end position that I would like to see that utilized a little bit more. But for me, Bryan, that's the scheme adjustments that I would like to see in 2025, or just maybe not even adjustments, just see more of it. Because when it was used in 24, it was really, really effective.
I'm curious if we're going to see more play action next season. We did not see a lot of true play action this year. We saw a little bit of it. A lot of the play action we saw, and if you look at like the PFF numbers, a lot of the play action that they count as play action was sort of like the flash fakes. It wasn't like a real play action. There's a little bit of it. I would like to see a little bit more of it. I'm not someone who believes you need to run 7, 8, 9 play action passes a game. I'm more like, give me 2 to 3, 3 to 4 really well-designed play action passes. One meant to be a screen, or 2, a couple shots, but a lot of play action passes also are things where you're